This camera, part of a flying laboratory, is recovered by Clyde Holliday of Johns Hopkins, who prepared it for its trip to the upper stratosphere. Rivaling the fantastic imagination of Jules Verne, the camera brought back a record of a flight into the heavens of a captured German V-2 rocket. At White Sands, New Mexico, the huge missile takes off. Air Force pictures show the rocket in flight, and the flying camera automatically takes over. The huge projectile drops the Earth behind at the tremendous speed of 4,000 feet per second. The rotation of the rocket causes the planet to spin before the lens, and the camera photographs the Earth 65 miles straight down. The horizon, 720 miles away, and the curvature of the Earth are astonishingly apparent in this still picture from the film. An observer in the rocket could have seen San Diego, Salt Lake City, Kansas City, and San Antonio. Approximately 1,600,000 square miles of the Earth's surface was revealed. The rocket reached the 65-mile height in 3 minutes. This giant engine of destruction, designed by Hitler to annihilate allied nations, now serves the worthy cause of peacetime research.
Okay, so just watching that short clip, a couple of facts and a couple of numbers we'll go through real quick, and I'll touch back on them later. But according to NASA, in order to enter orbit, you must go 4.9 miles per second.
In order to enter orbit, but this was a V-2 rocket, right? World War II buzz bomb, so it didn't go into orbit. It just went straight up, and when the fuel was exhausted, it fell straight back to the Earth.
4.9 miles times 5280 feet in a mile is 25,872 feet per second to reach, quote, escape velocity.
Not escape velocity, orbital velocity. Escape velocity is higher. That's like 25 or 26,000 miles per hour. Orbital velocity is only 17 or 18,000 miles per hour. But in either event, this rocket didn't go in orbit. It just went straight up. When the fuel was exhausted, it fell straight back to the Earth.
According to the old propaganda piece that we just watched, the rocket is going only 4,000 feet per second, or 0.75757575 to infinity miles per second. 4,000 feet every second times 60 seconds is 240,000 feet in a minute. 240,000 feet in a minute divided by 5280 feet in a mile, it's actually 45.4545454545 into infinity miles per minute times 60 minutes equals 2,727.272727272 miles per hour. So the total time from launch to the point when he states that they are 65 miles in the air is actually 30 seconds in the video.
Yeah, TheMorgile is scrutinizing this newsreel as if it was some kind of live broadcast, but it was a film camera. There were no digital cameras in 1946. So when the rocket returned to the Earth, somebody had to get the camera, recover the film, and go develop it.
Where they're 65 miles straight up. But the rocket had been launched, it was really less than or even exactly at 30 seconds into that film. I put a counter in there, so just to be sure. So if it was indeed traveling at 4,000 feet per second, even for the entire duration, which is impossible as it would have first needed to accelerate from zero and eventually reach 4,000 feet per second, this proves that the video that was released is at least misguided in their documentation of the speed of the rocket and the distance to the ground at the zenith. But
this film wasn't intended to be some kind of technical document for the inner cabal within the U.S. government. I mean, it was made for public consumption, right? This would have been seen in movie theaters because, for the most part, people didn't have TVs in 1946. I think about 0.5% of the U.S. population had TVs, so people would go to the movie theater, and this would be the filler that would be in between the main features when people were out getting popcorn. It's just not a technical film.
This is at worst a total fabrication, a lie that is apparent to anyone who does the math here and scrutinizes the video and narration. If the rocket was indeed going 4,000 feet per second, or 240,000 feet per minute, or 45.454545 miles per minute, or 2727.2727272 miles per hour, it would still take 1.4301430143014301 minutes, or a little bit less than a minute and a half, to get to the 65 miles above the Earth going 4,000 feet per second. So this video is obviously a hoax.
It's not obviously a hoax. I mean, even if the narrator made an error or two with the numbers, that doesn't make it a hoax, right? It would just mean that the narrator erred. But frankly, nobody expected some dickhead in 2015 would be going over this with a fine-tooth comb.
since the rocket going 4,000 feet per second reaches the 65-mile mark in under 30 seconds, according to the movie, this is a total lie. I found it extremely odd that all of the math around the numbers given by the narrator seemed to encode.
All right, he's going to launch into a little bit of numerology bullshit here, so I'm going to cut that.
Now, before we do that, pay attention to the videos, which I've added some brightness to allow for better visual representation of what's supposedly filmed from the backside of a rocket. And I'll do a couple of different takes on this, as well as try to track certain objects by rotating the camera instead of seeing the rocket rotate. So a couple of different things I've done there, just to try to depict some points, or at least for your visual interpretation, because to me it sort of looks like a model. One thing that's clear from the get-go in this little video is the fact that the first few seconds of the launch are shot from, they're shot of some rocket from an observer standing on the ground watching the rocket take off, and then the camera attached to the rocket automatically takes over.
Again, this guy seems to think that this is some kind of live broadcast that people would have watched in real time. That wasn't the case. The guy from Johns Hopkins, as the narrator said, the guy from Johns Hopkins recovered the camera. He would have had to develop that film later on, and it would have been spliced together with other footage.
After the Air Force pictures showed the rocket in flight. So now we really need to stop and think about this a minute. Why wouldn't the camera have simply continuously shot the launch of the rocket from the ground up? Why did they need to film the takeoff from the ground and then cut to another camera from the point of view of the quote rocket, which automatically picks up right where the Air Force camera left off on the ground? So to anyone who's edited video before, you'll see that this is an obvious cut of two completely different things. The first series of images is of the rocket launch as viewed from the ground, then cut to the rocket supposedly flying in space. To people in the 1940s, I can assure you this was a very realistic video.
First, it wasn't realistic video to anybody in the 1940s. It was realistic film, okay? And as I've stated before, this was for public consumption. This was entertainment to be seen in between movies in a theater. So nobody was scrutinizing it, and certainly nobody expected some dickhead flat earther in 2015 would be going over this and trying to pick it apart and look for like some kind of conspiracy. There's no goddamn conspiracy in it.
But the very first few frames on the automatic camera show it's really just sort of a distorted mess of light and steam, and maybe looks like some trickery to me, and certainly do not appear to be genuine. The entire plane and the baseball field, or whatever that is there, appear to be a model, along with all the trees, akin to those found on a toy train set. There are several other instances of such apparent trick photography, which involves cutting one segment of video into a completely different segment of video instantly with, either lens flare or distortion or rotation to trick the eye into believing that it's one continuous shot. If you're not familiar with change blindness, it's a way to trick the human eye. Just a quick example, if you look at an image with, say, 10 lions sitting in a jungle scene, and then you watch the image closely, you study it, and then if you're watching it and an 11th lion steps into the picture, then you're certainly going to notice that 11th lion very easily because you watched him enter the picture. But if you were to be distracted from looking at the 10 lions while the 11th lion entered and sat down, then odds are you wouldn't really notice the 11th lion unless you had, you were expecting to see it and you had studied the before and after pictures for a while, and then finally you might figure out eventually that there was another lion, an extra lion in the before and after picture. But that's sort of how change blindness works in terms of human perception of images. If you inspect this footage, you'll see they've spent a lot of time splicing at least 3 or 4 or possibly even more segments of videos together using sloppy editing practices, which are a necessary process prior to CGI or modern advances in video editing. And what I'll try to do is sort of play the questionable areas in forward and reverse a couple of times until you can kind of see where it's rather obvious that they're splicing different segments of videos together. Now, I must say that they certainly did do an excellent job for their time. This was in the 1940s. However, now that we have the tools to scrutinize videos frame by frame and in different levels of light and gamma and negative scales, it's obvious that the entire rocket launch that we're looking at here was a complete hoax.
What possible reason could there have been to hoax this in 1946? I mean, the war had just ended, and for the most part, the American people were just war-weary and wanted some level of entertainment, which is what newsreels like this furnished to some extent. Now, V-2 rockets existed because the Germans dropped these things on cities like London during World War II. At the end of the war, I would assume that the U.S. brought a number of these things back to study. Now, if they brought rockets back that didn't work, they wouldn't have made films about them because it would look stupid. And if they wanted to make a hoax video about a rocket, why would they choose a German V-2? I mean, think about that. If you're going to make a hoax video, why not make it an American rocket and say, hey, everybody, look at this great American rocket, you know, yay, U.S. #1, that kind of shit, right? They wouldn't have made a foreign rocket for a hoax.
And that it probably contains about 5% true video of a rocket launch, and 95% looks like scale models, trick photography, and clever manual editing, which literally involves cutting strips of film with scissors and splicing them back together with other strips of film with tape. No kidding. I mean, to me, it seems like models mixed in with some real footage from, either airplanes or ultimately plain old trick photography and clever editing. I've already proven that there's no possible way a rocket of its given velocity by the narrator, or 4,000 feet per second, could reach anywhere near 65 miles into the air in the given amount of time, given the fact that the video from the time of launch is less than 30 seconds, when it should take almost a minute and a half to reach that altitude traveling 4,000 feet per second. Now, really closer to 2 minutes if you factor in the amount of time it takes for the rocket to reach its max velocity upwards. It doesn't start off doing 4,000 feet per second. Now, couple that with the fact that they use several clips spliced into a single, quote, continuous animation of sorts, as well as the lack of footage from the ground up. And it's obvious this becomes a total fallacy designed to drum up early support for a rocket program and to drum up support for a ball Earth as well.
All right, first of all, nobody had to draw up support for a rocket program in 1946. I mean, the country just wasn't populated by millennial peacenik dickheads then as it is now, so at the time, rockets were the new thing. They were exciting. They were the wave of the future, and drawing up support for them just wasn't necessary. And as for the ball Earth, well, again, the world just wasn't populated by dickhead flat earthers at the time. I mean, there were more important things to worry about, unlike now when we have guys like you jacking off on social media about shit like this.
If you noticed, one of the things they mentioned was
And the curvature of the Earth are astonishingly apparent.
It wasn't a curve at all. It was either the horizon or just a fake altogether. But I think another fact to take into account on this video is the fact that once the rocket reaches a certain altitude, it begins to spin wildly out of control end over end, which is something that also occurs when weather balloons go up beyond a specific level of altitude into the sky. So there may have been some, actual images from a rocket ship in that particular video, but not the full thing we saw in its entirety. There was definitely some trick photography going there. There appears to be a point when the atmosphere becomes so very thin and scarce, objects with mass rendered with weight on the Earth due to barometric pressure, according to the laws of density.
Barometric pressure has nothing to do with weight. I mean, you can put something into, say, a vacuum oven and it doesn't suddenly start to float around. You can put something into a pressure chamber and it doesn't suddenly gain weight. I mean, these things just aren't connected.
Simply do not behave in a way consistent with that of objects firmly held together by the pressure, which we all take for granted here on the ground, since it's been in our lives forever.
Okay, I'm going to pause here and read the shit he has on the screen. This is exactly why NASA always launches rockets at an angle rather than vertically. They know that if the rocket goes too high, that the lack of barometric pressure will render the rocket a useless spinning wreck. Well, that's not true. Rockets are launched at an angle because NASA wants to insert them into orbit, right? So, they have to reach a certain orbital velocity, which is a tangential velocity. Again, it doesn't apply to the V-2 rocket because that didn't go in orbit. That just went straight up and came back down. If you want to launch something and have it stay up, then you have to put it in orbit. So that's why they launch things at an angle.
That a lot of the people behind this sort of thing do. So if you take the narrator's original assertion that it's traveling
at the tremendous speed of 4,000 feet per second.
I've already demonstrated that this is totally wrong, or the fact that the rocket reached 65 miles in less than 30 seconds at the max speed is wrong. Either way, this documentary is wrong, and I believe it was counting on people not doing the math involved, and those who did take the time to do the math would find the repeating or imperfect number sequences. Now, later on in the video, for some reason, he said that
the rocket reached the 65-mile height in 3 minutes.
Which was kind of weird because it timed the entire video starting from the time it took off the ground until the time that it reached the point where he said it was 65 miles up. A 30-second time span. So, in order for it to go 65 miles in 3 minutes, which still doesn't add up to either of the previous calculations, in order for his statement to be true, the rocket would need to go 21.66666666 to infinity miles per minute, 1906.666666 to infinity feet per second, half the speed the narrator said the rocket was going in the beginning. So even if, I guess what I'm saying here is, even if it did take 3 minutes instead of 30 seconds, which it actually did, then if the thing was going 4,000 feet per second, it was going twice as fast as it should have to reach that distance in 3 minutes. Again, 65 miles in 3 minutes. Should have been 1,906 feet per second, not 4,000 feet per second. But so, when we scrutinize what this official government account in 1943 was exactly a propaganda piece that makes absolutely not one iota of sense. If you scrutinize it, it also contains a bunch of built-in repeating decimals, which are sort of encoded into the numbers given by the narrator, which can indicate an occult significance. Now, I've seen such a wide range of numerological definitions for the different numbers. I don't want to subscribe to any of it, of course, but I do realize that the occult groups indeed do hold some type of code in numerology. So to someone initiated, these coded numbers hidden into the nonsensical distances and velocities may very well be a coded message of sorts. Who knows? But it sure wasn't the truth, and it sure wasn't anywhere near accurate in terms of the numbers the narrator was describing. If any numerologists out there care to take a crack at it, there you go.